Greetings, Warlords. Rodge here. Welcome to Saga Thursday, the show all about the skirmish miniatures game from Studio Tomahawk. Today we are joined by Brendan. Brendan, how's it going?
Hey, thanks very much for having me on, Raj. It's great to be here.
Yeah, so you are a new face on the show. Why don't you tell folks a little bit about yourself and your Saga background or history?
Yeah, so I started playing this game, got introduced to a friend of mine, Sean, who I know is one of the patrons on this show.
Yeah.
Got introduced back in first edition, and Normans were my first war band, kind of my main go-to when it came to Age of Vikings.
Awesome.
Um, and so it's kind of got hooked ever since. Really love the system, how the game plays. We're going to talk about how terrain works with Saga today,
Yes.
and so it's really just a wonderful game, and I've loved it ever since. And so I've branched out from Normans, kind of trying to have at least one army, kind of in every age. I guess Age of Alexander is kind of my
Good.
only
Yeah,
exception, but
every Saga
um,
player. Once you've been playing a
yeah,
while, you got to cover all your bases. So
yeah. Yeah.
that's
So
good.
it's kind of like Goths, Rage of Invasions, Crusaders, Rage of Crusades, using those Normans as well, and so chivalry with the newest book. There's been a lot of Burgundians and Germans for me lately,
Oh,
and
cool.
uh, and so it's been great, especially with Age of Chivalry, where you can just take kind of a set of models and plug them in to a lot of those different factions. So it's been
Hmm.
been fun to experiment with that recently.
Yeah, I still myself haven't really set on one faction yet. I'm getting closer to having to decide. I picked up all the models and stuff. So it's getting close now. I got to figure out a color scheme and everything. So looking forward to that. But yeah, so like you said, we're going to be talking about terrain today. So this is kind of a key part of Saga, kind of unusual for other games maybe, but both of the players, just as part of the gameplay process, set up the terrain. And so we're going to give you some tips and tricks on how to deploy deploy that stuff properly. Before we get to that, though, a few housekeeping items, as always, to address. We do have some events I want to talk about. So two of them specifically. So first up, we got Saga Battle of the Five Bridges. This is in Gatineau, Quebec. So that's basically Ottawa. So prior guest of the show, Frank, sent this over to me, and he wanted me to pip it out. So that is on October. Now I'm looking at the same image everybody else is, but it's really small on my screen. I'm going to make it bigger. October 18th. Okay, so I'll have a link to that in the show notes, but I wanted to pimp that out for I guess Frank. And the big one though is Fimbulwinter. So folks will have seen this has been announced. I've kind of been creeping the announcements out there on Patreon. I think I posted on the Discord now, but that'll be February 14th, 15th. That is at Saga Thursday HQ in the middle of Wisconsin, in the middle of the winter. This is Age of Chivalry plus some old friends and new enemies. We have a theme this year is the Black Death. So
Yeah,
there's
that
going to
looked pretty
be
cool.
plague terrain, and everybody's got to bring a doctor and stuff. And I did sculpt my own figure for that. So the last Patreon video is actually all about Fimbulwinter and the background in this guy. This actually isn't the first model I've sculpted, but he looks a lot like the last year's tournament winner for Fimbulwinter. Is there intentional there? I don't know. Yeah, maybe not. But you can find out all about that event. I'll have a link to that below. So registration is open. We're going to have, like I said, scratch built terrain. We're going to have dice this year, the special model, quite a few awards and stuff like that. So we put a lot of work into the packet, getting it set up. The venue is really cool. So it's a 2-day event, 6 games. Starts out at 8 points, and the plague comes in and ravages everybody. And
Yep.
so it goes down to
Prepare for
4
that plague.
points, and then it slowly picks back up. So every round, for the most part, will be a different point level between 4 and 8. And yeah, it should be pretty cool. I could talk a lot, a lot about it. The Patreon video has kind of all my thoughts on it, but I had you, Brendan, look at the packet there. So do you have any thoughts or questions about anything, or why we would do something or anything like that?
Yeah, so it's especially since we're going to be talking about terrain. I think the terrain rules are actually quite fun with plague aspect of things. So just in case folks haven't seen the packet yet, with terrain being plagued, no units can deploy on it. Levies or specialists with at least one figure on the terrain piece don't generate a saga die, so you can't just camp levy out in some ruins and have them sit there all game, because they're not going to be as effective. And then if they're in a plagued piece of terrain at the end of the game, they're going to count as a casualty.
Yeah.
And so if they don't make it out in time, they're going to be goners, and give your opponent some extra points.
Yeah. So kind of adds a cost. So all the ruins, the hardcover, the ruins are all plagued. So normally, and we'll get to the terrain stuff there, but normally a ruins is a good place to camp out. So now the packet, is where all the bodies are laying. Is that a good idea? So there's a certain cost to hanging out in the ruins, and then depending on the scenario, some of the other terrain pieces can be plagued as well. And the doctor, he kind of negates that. So if the scenario uses doctor, he can counteract that. So that's kind of one aspect. We're talking about terrain, but the terrain rules have kind of been stable for basically the entirety of second edition. So I think a lot of players
not really any changes
are, I think the system works pretty well, but I think players are kind of ready for a change maybe at this point. So just, if you're going to run an event and you want to mix it up, you can choose what aspect you want to mix up. So I chose terrain for this one as something to mix up, and that's kind of how one way we're incorporating the kind of the Black Death theme. So cool. Yeah, well,
and another thing that I thought was really interesting was that from the second game onward, the terrain is going to remain in their set positions. So wherever
is the other aspect.
That first crew that's on that table could just wreck it for everybody else.
I know. They're like,
set up and put on there.
They're like, come on, man, don't screw us. Don't put that field there.
It's like, gosh darn it, I'm playing Irish, or no, well, it's the Age of Chivalry, but if say there was an Irish player, it's like, sweet, there's like 5 terrain pieces on here. This is beautiful.
Yeah, it's really the kind of the free company for Chivalry is the only one really interacting
that is very true.
With terrain that much. So that's another aspect, of doing it is the terrain is pretty much locked in. So some of the scenarios, players will clear out the middle of the board. So the scenarios are kind of random to some extent. There's a pool. The first 2 are fixed, and then the scenarios 3 through 6 are kind of random, drawing from a pool of 6. So you can play 4 of the 6 scenarios. So some of them you got to clear out the middle, or just certain aspects. So the terrain can be moved a little bit, but on others it won't. And the interesting thing to see will be the objectives can actually go into terrain pieces. So the board will be set up however it was from the prior game. And then, you might have the 3 objectives going down, and one of them might be sitting in a woods or something like that. And it might be plagued too, on top of it. So
I don't want to go in there.
A lot of the scenarios are you can dismount if the terrain piece is, or if the objective is in the terrain piece, then you can use the dismounting rules from the Book of Battles. That it's like a built-in rule. It's kind of in the advanced Book of Battles rules section, but there's rules for dismounting your troops in there. And then the first one is kind of the siege scenario 2. You can dismount in that one if you want to climb over the walls. So we're pretty pumped about it. And I think just the kind of the terrain aspect, I would say some of the scenarios are pretty basic, because we're kind of focusing on the terrain. That's going to be different enough, so keep the terrain or the scenario is kind of straightforward, and then the terrain is kind of a unique element that, you know, we'll talk about. The terrain could be your ally in this event. It's going to be, you know, something you're going to have to work with, work around, adjust your troops. You know, something you're going to have to work with on the fly. So, yeah, looking forward to it. All right, another thing we do in these monthly videos here is show off some goodies from the friend of the show. This month's friend of the show is Eduardo at Black Knight Miniatures. So he's been busy delving into the Age of Chivalry once again. So he's got some Hussite handgunners he just posted the other day. These guys look pretty cool. He's got the Polish sergeants from 13th century, so little Crusades stuff, and then back to it with the German men-at-arms in the 15th century as well. So he's been busy there. Definitely check him out. I know he's recently lowered his prices on just buying the sets on My Mini Factory, and also his, I think there's a Patreon. He definitely has a Tribes, so definitely check out the Tribes. And I know they kind of vote on what they want to see over there. So if you want Eduardo to do more chivalry stuff, head on over there, join the tribe. He is going to offer a gift to friends of the show. I'm thinking it will be the Hussite Command Group. I did not. I'm usually running this as a seat of the pants operation, Brendan, so I didn't give him enough time to respond and confirm. But the Hussite Command Group fits the bill for a gift for the Lifeguard and Warlords on the Patreon. So that isn't confirmed yet, but I will try to confirm that as soon as possible. But as of the recording here, it's still a little up in the air, but he's doing some cool stuff there. So thank you, Eduardo, for supporting the show. And as far as the Rodge Originals, the Shield Club, so I'm a little bit behind here, but we got the late Roman Oval Shield set out from July. I'm working on the Pict set from August. So for September, it's going to be Normans, and I'm still working on the Age of Heroes book. Yeah, and hopefully, I think with the Norman set done, I'll double check with everybody, but I think I will basically have the Age of Vikings covered as far as like every faction, every shield will, there will be an option out there.
Very nice.
I'm still working through the Age of Heroes book as of this recording, so it's kind of caused some delays in August here to all this. So, but the book is moving forward. It should be done soon. So, at that point, the shields will get back on schedule. But looking forward to that, and looking forward to having all the Age of Vikings stuff covered, and invasions too. Really, only thing might be like Hun.
Yeah.
Do the Huns?
Yeah.
You think of the composite bow troops. Do their Hearthguard mounted? Do they have shields off the top of your head?
They could have, perhaps, if they were forced to dismount or were unhorsed, during a combat, they might have a shield to fall back on. But yeah, typically we think of Hunnic warriors as just horsemen that use their hands for their bows. So they might. It's a Google search.
They have the levies and mounted warrior. Yeah, those would be kind of more like conscripts almost, but they could be like from the east though. So to cover invasions, I'm gonna look into that to see like what shields those troops might be using. But I think Vikings will be covered, and then most of invasions by the end of the year. So all right, well that kind of covers us on the extra bits. Let's get to the main topic here, which is terrain. So we've kind of hit up terrain a few times just in our discussion on Fimbulwinter, but typically when you're playing a game of Saga, you and your opponent will set up the terrain as part of this scenario. There is a universal terrain method, which I think is going to be basically what part of our discussion here today, but we'll just mention most scenarios use that. Not everyone. The Studio Tomahawk tournament pack actually has a couple different methods in there for good or for ill. And if you go to an event or something like that, usually you will be able to set it up every single round. So why don't you kind of kick it off here with our thoughts, and we'll have a discussion.
Yeah. So in general, when I think of the terrain system in Saga, I think it is a very good system. I think it has a lot of ways that it makes the game of Saga feel very unique, sets it apart from a lot of the other tabletop games that are out there. The other tabletop game that I tend to play a lot is Lord of the Rings, or Middle-earth strategy battle games, it's known. And in that game, we just kind of throw stuff on the table and just, does it look good? All right, let's go with it, kind of thing. It doesn't have the kind of regimented,
so like,
more methodical feel that,
is there just like a paragraph that says like, set it up in like a mutually agreed way with your, that's like kinda, how Warhammer used to be.
Or just kind of gives you rough rules for like terrain density, that kind of thing.
Okay.
But it's nothing as precise as Saga. And so I feel that because Saga has all of these, not only the way you set up the terrain, but also rules for the terrain and the different attributes that we'll talk about, the different terrain pieces have and kind of what they mean and stuff, that how the terrain itself will go on and affect the game that is about to be played. So yeah, I think that it's a pretty unique and neat system overall. And also allows for a lot of counterplay between you and your opponent. I always think of it as like the game within the game. To start out, the longer game of Saga. And so I feel that what you do to set yourself up for success in the terrain deployment aspect of a game of Saga is going to make your game that will come perhaps easier or perhaps harder, depending upon how you and your opponent kind of set that terrain up, and can shift perhaps a neutral matchup in your favor, or maybe bring one to more an even keel if it was like usually a typically bad matchup for your warband and who you're playing against. Could also go the other way if you tend to have good matchups and the terrain, doesn't necessarily end up in your favor on the board before ever a dice are rolled. So in general, when we talk about terrain rules and how two players go about setting them up, and this can vary depending on your tournament or how the Book of Battles has it. But typically you'll roll off, and then the person who wins that roll off will start setting up terrain pieces around the board. And some tournaments, a lot of those that I go to up in BC, will actually have the second player start with terrain placement, and then start the back and forth. Kind of have with the second player somewhat at times at a disadvantage because they are going second. The terrain starting with them can be a little bit of a equalizer, so to speak, in terms of allowing them to kind of have a little bit more say as to what goes on the board to start things off. So
why don't we kind of just go over that method real quick? So whether the first player is going first, or the second player, the first person sets down a piece of terrain, basically anywhere on the table. If you're playing a scenario with objectives, frequently you won't be able to put them within short of an objective. So a piece of terrain goes down somewhere, either on the opponent's side, your side, wherever you think it goes. The next person puts one down. Then it has to be more than short from any other terrain piece. A third piece goes down, and then the interesting point is that the fourth piece. So, we're kind of using the first player, second player terms here, and you may not be the first person setting down terrain or not, but basically the person who is setting down terrain second will have the choice then to move a terrain piece medium up to medium. I don't think you have. Do you have to go the full medium?
It's up to up to M.
So you don't have to move anything. You can look at the terrain. if you're that person, say the terrain is good, I don't want to move it.
Yep.
Or they can put down another piece of terrain and keep that process going. If they do that, then it goes back to the other fella, and then he can move a piece of terrain or put down more terrain. And basically, at some point, someone's going to stop the madness and say, "Okay, we got it. We're going to move one. We got enough."
At some point, you're going to run out of room because you can't.
Yeah, and that's true too.
Even
you could have two
pieces,
factions.
You can't fit within, outside of S.
The board can fill up pretty quick if you grab in those big pieces. So if somebody moves a piece of terrain, instead of putting a terrain down, then the other player gets to put down one piece of terrain. So at a minimum, if both players agree, you can put down just 3 pieces. Some guy moves it or it doesn't, and then the other guy says, "You know what? Three's good. I don't want any more." You could have that. Otherwise, it could go up to 5 or 6 pieces of terrain. So I would say probably that like 4. Probably.
Yeah,
that's from what I've seen, just kind of casual games. The 3 pieces go down. Somebody moves it, and then usually some guy will put the 4th piece down most of the time. Yeah. How do you see that on your side?
Yeah, so typically, and it once again, we're going to use this phrase a lot. Depends on the matchup. And so it really does depend upon who I'm going up against. But yeah, typically I would say 4 is usually about what I see on the board. With that 3rd piece going down, the 2nd player moving something, and then the 1st player kind of putting that 4th piece down. And that's kind of what I see with the games of Saga that I usually play. The board isn't really kind of chock full of the terrain, because everybody, of course, wants to dive after the ruins and the rocky ground first, because of how good they are, and we'll talk about why. But yeah, so it's typically about 3 to 4 pieces, I think, is what I typically see.
Okay. Yeah, so let's say it's your first game of Saga, or maybe you got a couple games under your belt. For your first game of Saga, you should play the First Fortune scenario. You can find that on the Discord. If you can search on Goonhammer, I posted an article about it. So that uses just a single piece of woods. So that should be your first scenario. But say you've got a couple games in and you're ready to be a big boy and use the universal method. So, and we can maybe, I'm sure we'll kind of go through each terrain piece, but so what should be if you're the first guy, you're going to put down a piece of terrain. What should you grab and where should you put it? And so this is a huge open-ended question with many factors and facets, but I don't know. What are your thoughts? Have you distilled that down?
Yeah. So it's, once again, depends on what's in your own warband and who you're going to be going up against. If you have at least one kind of levy shooting unit, so you got a levy bow unit, a really good place to place them is going to be in some kind of either rocky ground or ruin that will give them that solid cover to allow them to be a little bit more defensive. Also, if they get charged, there's terrain components that will be able to help them out if they are the defenders in that terrain. And so that is kind of what I look for if I have that kind of unit with me in my warband. That is what I want to go for first, is either the ruins of the rocky ground. If I have other, say if we're talking about Age of Chivalry, with the latest supplement that's come out, you have things like the cannon that a lot of different factions want to use, and that needs, even though it's got a limited range, it still needs line of sight. So that's where you would want to go for maybe the rocky ground over the ruins, because the ruins being high have that high term associated with it. It's going to block the line of sight.
Depends if you got the cannon or the other guy's got the cannon, which one you're going to do.
So that might affect whether you want to go for the rocky ground first or the ruins first. But that's often what I see when I go to tournaments and also when I play locally. that the first player, whoever gets to place terrain first, is kind of looking hungrily at that kind of neoprene terrain stack, and is like, all right, where's that rocky ground? Where's that ruins? I need it. And that's kind of what I see go down first.
Yeah, totally agree with you. You know, I think there's a difference playing at an event versus playing in the club. So at an event, absolutely. And so this is kind of where I mentioned, you know, tournament and terrain and stuff maybe being kind of stale. It's been this way since the second edition came out. So frequently you want to grab the rocky ground or the ruins if you can. So at my events, I like to limit those to not every table can grab those. So this is a TO thing, whether they'll be available or not. I like to kind of use one terrain pack between two tables. So it's possible your like opponents will grab those first, just to create some variation. Because yeah, I agree. Most of the times, it's not a bad idea to grab one of those, even if you're not going to use it, because you don't want to give your opponent both of those pieces if they do have a unit of levy. Because even if they don't have 2 units of shooters, frequently that'll give them, you know, gives them more deployment flexibility on where they want to put the shooters. Now there's 2 options for them to drop into. So unfortunately, you know, whether you want to use it or not, oftentimes you do have to grab the other solid cover terrain piece as the second option, just to keep it away from the opponent, because you don't want them to have both pieces. So frequently that is pick number 1 or pick number 2. I guess one other option, I think, in competition with that, in my mind, is the large hill. And so this is kind of,
especially the steep hill.
Well, the steep hill is good as well, but I'm thinking when you are kind of you got your opponents, you got your war band, you kind of know, you can kind of think of it this way: do you want a lot of terrain or not? And if you don't, then putting down the hill just smack dab in the middle of the board, or maybe shift it towards your deployment zone a little bit if you have like phalanxes or pikemen or cavalry. So there's quite a few war bands that don't want anything to do with terrain. And if you're one of those and your opponent doesn't have a lot of shooters, you're not worried about the solid cover, you're never going to go in, you know, no matter what, you know, for the most part. Going for that hill isn't a bad idea. I've seen it 1,000 times, is setting that hill down right in the middle. We're going to have a big old fight. Now, sometimes the terrain or the objectives will kind of clear ground in the middle to make sure you have open ground to fight. But if the scenario isn't doing that, then just putting the hill down right in the middle is a good play. Or maybe having it slightly in your deployment zone just to make sure you've got some room to deploy on the edge, and kind of you got some room to set up your troops and run across the board. So I think that's kind of the other one. It's either the solid cover or the hill. Would you agree typically?
So definitely with the solid cover, on trying to put it on your side of the table. And then also you can think about trying to disadvantage your opponent with what terrain, because you can place the terrain anywhere on the board.
So that's where the steep hill comes into play.
Correct.
You can either set yourself up for victory or screw your opponent. So that's like another kind of a third option.
Yeah.
And that's where the steep hill, just put it smack dab in the middle of their deployment zone. Can be really annoying. That's happened to me many times. So when we play, I'll talk about casual games maybe towards the end. But so are you the type of fella that would do that, Brendan?
Am I that dirty dog that would do that to my opponent? Short answer is yes. I sadly am. So steep hill. I'm also a particular fan of gifting my opponent with swamps, as they don't really provide any kind of cover. There's no defensive aspects of the swamp that the opposing player can use, and they also are the only set of terrain that count as dangerous, where if you end a movement inside that piece of terrain, you gain a fatigue. And then it's even worse for cavalry because they will gain a second fatigue because the swamps count as both uneven and dangerous, and so those effects stack. And so it's really an inconvenient thing to have kind of thrust into your deployment zone, and you then sometimes don't want to deploy in them. You can, because it doesn't give you any downsides.
It's not a bad
if
idea.
You're sitting in the terrain and they're not moving in it. So that's, it is an okay place to put your shooters if you have no other option, because your opponent has to come in to get you. You're just not going to benefit defensively at all from the terrain in that aspect. So yeah, swamps, steep hills, I would say are the two that you probably want to look for in terms of the counterplay, to kind of inflict those upon your opponent. And I wanted to bring up one scenario in particular where those two pieces of terrain are going to be pretty awful to deal with, and that's the ambush scenario, where
where they're moving on.
In general, you've got scenarios that will give you a deployment zone, say like L from your board edge. Ambush is very unique in that it doesn't have a deployment zone. You are moving on your troops from a point on the board on your table side that is typically it's L plus M away from wherever these baggage markers are as they're moving across the field. And so if you know, say if your opponent is going first, you can kind of sort of visualize where their point is going to be on their board edge, and you can kind of set a steep hill or a swamp at roughly that point, and it can get kind of gnarly for your opponent to have to, especially if they're a foot army.
Oh yeah, you can definitely get screwed over on terrain placement in that ambush scenario there. The key is kind of getting it at the right point. The movement of those baggages or whatever is a little unpredictable there, so you don't know exactly where you're coming on. But if you can just get kind of two pieces down and there's like a little S gap between them, that can be pretty rough for a lot of factions.
And you can predict it if, say, you're going, if your opponent's going second, there will be a second chance for that baggage marker to move, and so there will be.
Should be a little further
you can then
down,
kind of visualize it at that spot where they're going to come in is going to be a little further down if those baggage markers ended up moving, a couple of times, thereby pushing their point of entry a little bit further down their board edge. So yeah, it's it can get a little nuts, and so yeah, just a tip there on ambush when it comes to terrain placement if you want to be a little evil mustache twirling Saga player over there.
Yeah. I like the idea of, kind of mentioned, you want to mess with your opponent, put the marshes and swamps and the steep hill, that goes on the opponent's side, and you want to keep your side clear. I mean, those can be decent bases, but they don't provide any cover. So if they're attacking you, with shooting especially, it can be difficult to get out of there. If they do go into the swamps and go after your stuff, you are protected a little bit, but then it's tough for you to go in and as well and try to hit those units that hit your units. So they can be used kind of defensively, but for the most part, you kind of want to get those on the opponent's side to disrupt and mess with them. So so I guess we kind of got negative terrain for the opponent. We talking about the solid cover. It's kind of positive terrain to kind of get on your side if you can. We've got the hill is kind of a neutral piece that just kind of clears it, and then it kind of leaves the woods, and the fields are kind of your middle road, kind of all-purpose terrain. Provide some blocking of movement, a little shooting cover. The trees are a little higher, it can block line of sight, but kind of like a neutral, friendly terrain piece for all, you could say. So let's talk about a little bit about the high and the low terrain. So the difference between a woods and a field is high or low. So most of the in most games of Saga, it doesn't come into play that much. The number one thing is if you got the cannon, like you say, a mani ballista in Age of Magic, where you can draw unlimited range. At that point, it does matter. And typically, you'd want to go for the woods over the fields if the opponent had a mani ballista, for example, or a cannon, just to kind of split things up. Or if it's the Normans, I'm sure people play that against you, where your archers are shooting 2L. Then
absolutely, putting those woods up in my way, those darn trees,
to counter stuff. So, interesting thoughts. I guess I'm gonna kind of just throw out some random plays here that I've done and have seen done, and maybe you can chime in with some of your own. So a lot of this is just
sure.
It can be kind of chaotic, whether you want to do this or not. Depends on the scenario, your opponent. Obviously, you might set it down to do this, then your opponent moves it. But so one thing, if you can, so we talked about getting the heavy or a solid cover on your side. Well, if you can do that and get exactly where you want, I like to put it where it's partially in my deployment zone and then a good 4 inches, a short length out of your deployment zone. So you can deploy your levy or shooters, whatever you want, in there safely. And then you can move them on your turn. And so now they're within the kind of the middle of the field, and they're still protected, and they can kind of project their range out another 4 inches. So just kind of having it, if you can push it back against your opponent, the solid cover kind of deeper into their deployment zone sometimes, or if it's just flush with their deployment zone. If if your opponent puts the levy in there, sometimes you can just avoid it, right? So that's one thing you can do. So if you can get your little base kind of projecting out into the middle of the battlefield, I think that's a good thing to do.
Yeah, and then you can also place that solid cover, if you're trying to put it on your side of the board, a little bit further up the board, just in case your opponent moves it on you, so that your base isn't shoved back into your own deployment zone where you really wanted to put those archers, but now it's not as strategically viable if your base, your solid cover base gets moved backwards.
Yeah, that's we're getting pretty deep into it now. It's like, are they going to push this back? So you want to kind of put it forward towards the middle, so if they push it back, but you don't want it too close where they can push it towards their side, and then all of a sudden they're the ones who get the solid cover terrain piece. Kind of anchoring that a little bit more towards your side is a good idea. Another play I'll do with the solid cover is if I have like a Hearthguard unit, and for some reason I need to get across the board, either for the scenario or because I want to get to the other side and the enemy has shooters or something. Sometimes I'll put the solid cover just kind of in the middle, and then that becomes the lane that my Hearthguard are going to take to walk across the board. So it shortens their movement, but it provides them solid cover against shooting. So Hearthguard usually be armor 6 with a 3+ save. Well, you could usually is enough that your opponent isn't going to want to shoot at them, so they can kind of walk across the board. At least 8 inches, they're unmolested. It's tough for the opponent to kind of surprise attack them with Saga abilities and stuff like that.
Makes them feel a lot safer against those pesky levy crossbows we see all the time in Age of Chivalry these days.
Yeah, so that's not a bad idea as well. Like I did that at All Father's Day. One of the scenarios, I kind of just had that. It was like a little base of operations. I was playing against Ordenshot, and he had a lot of shooters. And so I'm like, well, I'm going to attack him on the edges or whatever. But in the meantime, my Hearthguard are walking across, and at some point they'll pop out, and they'll be in the enemy side of the field. So that's an idea. Do you have any kind of random things like that like kind of like a terrain play or something like that?
Yeah, if I'm trying to hide a unit, if I know that my opponent outranges me significantly, but I've got some horses I want to protect, because cavalry are easier to hit with shooting attacks.
Hmm.
Um, that open hill strategy you talked about earlier, I'd like to kind of hide those cavalry behind the open hill, not the steep hill. That's not going to help them out at all.
Yeah, yeah,
But
yeah.
the open hill will definitely help them stay protected and shielded because it is a high piece of terrain that no one can shoot over. Um, and then they are free to then move across that. Either if a unit, strays too close to the hill, and then over they go, or if with Normans we have a pursuit that allows you to charge without fatigue
Hmm.
and kind of stuff. Um, so yeah, I think open hills are a good way of protecting those kind of squishier units, so to speak, from shooting when they're mounted. Um, Also, if you are fielding, say you're a Roman player, and correct me if I'm wrong, Raj, but I believe the Manu Ballista can actually move onto uneven terrain, or it can at least be deployed there. Um,
Off the top of my head, I can't say.
yeah,
Yeah, very well may be able to. Yeah.
yeah.
When
So
you
say
play
for
Sean,
instance,
he uses it, right?
yeah,
So,
yeah,
right.
yeah. So say for instance, if you are gifted with a steep hill during terrain, placement, you can actually place your Manu Ballista kind of just a little bit a toe, so to speak, of that base on the steep hill, and it can then shoot over the steep hill
Hmm.
instead of being on the opposite side, while also then being protected from people crossing that steep hill because they're going to be slowed down because it's uneven. So you can still shoot over it while making your opponent take longer to get to you if they're just crossing it from, say, the long way instead of going all the way around the hill. So there are a couple. Um, and then, yeah, using, like I said, with cavalry, using woods, smaller, large woods or the open hill to kind of protect them from any kind of archery fire. So,
Yeah, especially the small woods, I think is pretty. Got some pointy
yeah.
bits, so
Yep.
the line of sight blocking feature does come into play, where you can kind of approach
Yep.
and be totally blocked from an opponent, and that's a good thing to do if the opponent they do set up their solid cover base and they do have a unit that they're going to put in there. You can just kind of do a counter deployment of the woods exactly 4 inches in front of it and kind of angled to just block the
Yep.
majority of the board, um,
Hmm.
from that side. So that's something you could do. And then two, that kind of gives you, if you do want to approach the shooter base and it's not super urgent, you could kind of move through the woods if you wanted, and it kind of gives you the light cover on the way. So that's something you could do, or just leave them alone. They can hang out in that solid cover if they want, but they're not going to have line of sight to the majority of the battlefield
Yep.
because you just put a
Yep.
tree down.
Yep, and that your opponent's going to have to decide. Do I move them out of the solid cover, or do I just start taking shots at dudes moving toward me in the light cover that the woods provide? So they're going to
Mhm.
have to make that decision.
Yeah, I definitely try to. If they do get in the solid cover, try to deploy your troops in such a way that they're not gonna be able to do anything unless they come out the woods. So you're gonna be 12.1 inches away from that
Yep.
solid terrain piece. And you say, come on out. Yeah. You want to shoot, come on out. You can take the shot. But cool. So yeah. So at this point I kind of want to talk about kind of competitive versus casual play. So I would say I'm not super on top of my terrain game because actually when we play we usually almost never so these are like pickup games at our house and
Sure.
stuff or the hobby shop whatever. We almost never use the large terrain pieces, so
Oh, interesting.
we'll use the hill but we won't use the other three. So sometimes if I do go to an event I'm gonna be kind of thrown off when
Yeah.
those are kind of
What's
one of the ones
what's
you want to
this?
use. I'll be like, it's bigger than I remember. The
Yep.
other thing too, we kind of have a gentleman's agreement not to use the solid cover. So
Okay.
frequently we use the swamps the trees, the fields, and the hill, and you can have perfectly viewable games. Just with that
absolutely.
terrain selection. And if you are kind of sick of the tit for tat, solid cover game, and you could just kind of have an agreement like that with your opponent, I think is good. That's kind of just how we've developed, played, but it can kind of throw you off if you go back to an event then and a cutthroat approach. But I think that's perfectly fine. That that's the way Saga was designed. Is intended to be that way. So definitely take advantage of that stuff. You are able to do so. Do you feel like there's a difference between the casual games versus the tournament games for you guys?
Yeah, for sure. I think with tournament, you definitely see in the tournaments that I play, the second player tends to start with terrain first, and so I've seen almost always someone grab immediately those ruins, that rocky ground. Depending on the scenario, of course, some like Sacred Ground, you do have kind of set terrain where you have the open hill in the middle, and then your opponent, and you are choosing terrain to be your sacred ground and deploying that. But yeah, a lot of the tournaments that I go to, the first piece of terrain that is picked up is typically a solid cover piece.
Yep.
And then
Even if you don't plan on using it yourself, you just gotta deny it to your opponent. So totally agree with that. And that's kind of my default when I'm at an event. If it's there, I'm gonna grab it, whether I need it or not, to stop my opponent from trying to benefit.
Yep. And in the more casual, just kind of pick up games at the shop, I think there's a lot more variance in terms of what terrain is actually used. I'm not always necessarily gunning for, because I've been playing a lot of goths recently, so I don't bring any shooters in that list, so I don't have to necessarily worry about any kind of solid cover to put those levy bows in. And so with all the melee that the goths have, I typically am just kind of running forward and trying to use terrain to hamper the opponent's deployment versus really trying to benefit kind of my own side of the board. And so there's, I think, a lot of variance with that play style versus actually having shooters in your list. I think that will also just naturally improve the variance because you don't have to worry about it. You also might be concerned a little bit about your opponent having all the solid cover, but if you are foot melee focused, you can just move into that cover going after their levy shooters or other units, and then benefit from the cover that way, as long as you can make it across the board. So
it's true. So sometimes if your opponent, if they don't push right up to the edge of the solid cover, if they leave room, you can just do a double move and end up you're in the terrain, you're next to them, you're completely within. You have a fatigue, but if your opponent says a levy unit sitting there, it's fine. You'll take a breather. Next turn we're coming for you. So
and goths love fatigue. So
so for the goths in particular, putting the terrain on their side doesn't slow you. In some ways helps you out. If you're trying to trigger a certain ability.
And I've done it in a tournament playing my Germans recently, where we were playing Sacred Ground, and I just double moved to be right in that Sacred Ground, and then had Rallying Cry ready to go to be able to remove that fatigue on my opponent's turn. And so that it is something you can play around if you know you're going to be moving toward solid cover on your opponent's side of the field. You can just plan to double move to get over there, and then just have a contingency
get
plan.
Over there, camp out. Sometimes even if they don't have shooters, it's not a bad idea to just go over there, camp out, rest off the fatigue. So you get to their side, and then it becomes difficult for them to root them out, even though you took that fatigue. And like Goths or Germans aren't concerned about that fatigue that much, but other war bands, you're going to have to spend a turn to be vulnerable. So you kind of just wait it out in the terrain. Difficult for your opponent to get at them, and then pop out fresh the next turn, and then still you're not really doing anything because you were slowed. But after that, you can go for it. So, only one way to think about it, but
so I think there's a lot more variance in pickup games at the store. versus what you would see in a tournament. And I think that definitely makes the game healthier. Doesn't get as stale terrain wise when you have all that variance and a lot more strategies to use or feel that you can use because you're not in a super competitive setting.
Do you guys use exclusively like the neoprene terrain set from playmats.eu? Okay.
Yeah, so that's what we've shifted to, and I've got a set. Sean's got a set, so we pretty much whenever we play, someone's got it. Or if we're teaching new players, we can just bring that with us and we're ready to go. There's whenever other people that we game with kind of wander by, they're like, oh, that's unfortunate, because they kind of look down a little bit on those neoprene things.
Wow.
And they really want the table to kind of pop when it comes to terrain. I actually don't mind it, and I've been using neoprene for quite a while, especially since that's what the tournaments that I go to use, and I find that it's very easy when you're moving units through that terrain. You don't have to move trees and rocks out of the way to get the models in.
Concerned about the edges, so they're perfect for that respect. I would say obviously getting terrain toppers and stuff like that, having trees to put onto the woods, having hay bales and fences for the fields, having actual ruin pieces to put on the ruins. That makes, you do that, it's basically it's not any different than any other terrain piece. And particularly if the better it looks, sometimes the worse plays. Like a local guy made a bunch of terrain, like these stone henges for the ruins, and they're like all like locked into place. They look cool, but it's like like impossible to get your figures to the edge. And like, is it somebody go there or not, or whatever? So I think having terrain toppers for that stuff is good. I would say,
especially if you put them on clear bases, I think, because that really allows.
You could do it. You could do it that way.
Thing underneath to show through.
Yeah, I try to like match the colors as best I can. But if you're playing on a neoprene mat, which I think most people are, then having neoprene terrain areas makes sense to me. If you're playing on an old school flocked wooden sanded board, hand painted, then having terrain that matches the flocked, MDF circles that are hand painted and stuff, that makes perfect sense to me. But I will say, if the terrain game is getting kind of stale, I would say do consider branching out into scratch built pieces, because that set is one specific size, the woods and stuff, and most of it is maximum size. So for a small terrain, you can have a woods or a swamp, actually like a 4-inch by 4-inch square is a legal piece of small terrain. And so those are like, the swamp's a little smaller, like 6 by 6 maybe, but like all the woods and everything are close to maximum size. The fields are like maximum size, 8 inches by 8 inches. And it's the same thing for the large terrain pieces. They're like 12, fields like 12 by 12, perfect square, the absolute maximum size. So I would say that's probably wasn't really the intent of the rules. You have a minimum size and a maximum size. So you would think the intent would be most to fall somewhere in between there, and kind of, if the smallest, a large piece can get, I think, is a 6 by 6 or maybe an 8 by 8, and you'd think like a 9 by 10 by a 9 by 10 or something would be kind of the medium piece. But we're all using this product that was, they just decided, let's make them as big as they could. They could have made them all the minimum size, and we would be all playing games with like minimum size terrain pieces, like in an alternate universe. And
that'd be interesting. That definitely changed the game up quite a bit.
So you could, so just think about that, and that's something we're trying for Fimbulwinter as well, along with the plague terrain and everything else, the terrain being fixed. We're going to have some different terrain shapes, because you can have a woods that's like 4 inches by 8 inches, so it's like a tube shaped. And so, like, well, that's interesting. You can kind of jump across it easily in 2 moves from one direction, and it kind of blocks more line of sight than. It's easier to block line of sight the thinner it is, to hide behind. Or you could have like a hill, the top of my, like a 6 by 6 or 8 by 8, so a small the legally smallest size hill, and it's only
Sure.
blocking a smaller piece. So just keep that in mind. That's kind of a benefit towards building your own terrain, is kind of doing interesting stuff. I had like an L-shaped ruins. It was like a corner of a castle. So that's
Okay.
it's legal. It's kind of 4 inches wide going around, but in an L kind of shape.
Okay.
So I know playmats.eu, they do have kind of some different size woods and stuff. They're not in the set itself, but if you're going to buy a bunch of those for some reason, consider getting the alternate woods. They have like different hills and different size rocky grounds and stuff like that. So you could probably mix and match. It might cost more, but they do have some alternate sizes. So I would just encourage folks to give that a look as well, and just kind of consider the flexibility of the entire system and some fun. Try something different.
Yeah, and I think if you really want to mix up your terrain, really where terrain can be placed, try different objective scenarios. There's a lot in the Polish tournament pack that has all kinds of where objectives can be placed, especially if you've got the scenarios where the objectives are placed kind of like in a cross.
There's
Because
like 5.
That's really going to relegate.
Tomahawk one too. Yeah.
Yeah.
We got 5.
Yeah. And so that will really relegate where the terrain can be. And so if you're just tired of your opponent sticking the ruins or the rocky ground kind of in that middle-ish or centered toward them placement, you'll have objectives that will of course push out where the terrain can be from, because you can't have terrain within S of an objective marker typically. And so if you feel that your terrain scene is kind of getting a little stale, that's what I would recommend, is trying those different objective scenarios where the configuration where the objectives are can really mix things up terrain wise.
That's good. All right. Well, looking at my notes here, I think I hit everything that I wanted to talk about as far as this is more kind of focused on the terrain placement stuff versus the special rules of it, actually. But anything else you kind of want to contribute or think we should bring up?
Yeah, some other things that we could talk about, especially when it's tied to terrain specifically, would also like be the topic of deployment and how you could actually use the terrain to affect kind of how you deploy your troops. Where if you are able to grab that that rocky ground or ruins and kind of put them on your side, there are ways in which you could also maximize that benefit. We've already talked about putting the levy in there, but using that kind of as a kind of a bulwark, so to speak, of your line, if you wanted to use that, or if you've got or trying to really make sure that if you've got units that you want to have protected, like your special equipment units that can't close ranks, or if you've got horses that also can't do the same thing, we've got some tricks that we can talk about. So when it comes to deployment, Raj, what do you tend to do? What kind of things you're cooking up over there?
Yeah, I'll just kind of toe the line generally. Interesting thing would be if I think my opponent will come across on that first turn and try to hit me or shoot me up. So again, faction dependent. So one thing you could kind of do is have 2 pieces of terrain with a decent sized gap between them in your deployment zone ish. So you could see you have a woods on one side, a ruins or whatever, swamp, basically anything on the other side. Hopefully tall pieces will work a little bit better here if you're worried about shooting, but have maybe like a 12-inch gap or a 16-inch gap. So it's enough that you're not super constrained, but you could have like all your foot warriors going across, and then your cavalry, your Hearthguard, your warlord are kind of sitting behind them. There's downsides to that deployment, but at least if you think they're going to come across and hammer you with javelins or composite bows or shooting. At least there's kind of like a first wave you have to get through to kind of get your more vulnerable units. So that's something that I will do sometimes, either deliberately or just worked out. I might have to deploy that way just because the battle's going to be in the middle, and flipping units to the far flanks, especially if you're foot and your warband doesn't have a multi activations, trying to get them in can be challenging. So I've done that. Sometimes you'll just have woods in your deployment zone or anything, and you have no intention of staying there. But if you put your archers or javelin guys or something in there, if you think the opponent will come early, at least you have a little protection. They have to, it's like a third activation to get into you or something like that. So sometimes I'll put stuff in and just first turn it pops out and that's it. It doesn't, the terrain doesn't come into play for the rest of the game. It's kind of some things I do. Is that what you were thinking there, or your ideas there?
Yeah, so I like to either stick, if I'm say playing my Normans, I always like to stick those levy archers in some type of terrain if I can, if the terrain's worked out the way that I've wanted it to. If I'm not running any archers, well then that's frees me up that way to kind of deploy things. I like to put my warriors like in that front rank because they are more expendable than say like my Hearthguard or the squishier levy. And then I like to put the Hearthguard kind of right behind them as that second line. If an opponent's unit is hyper aggressive and they come and they smash into my unit of warriors, then I've got the Hearthguard to follow up the next turn, and just to be kind of right there to support. And I think having your units deployed in such a way that they can help each other out instead of kind of having this Superman unit charge forward on its own to be just kind of focused down and reduced, I think is a really good way to kind of think about deployment, and just to have a lot of secondary units to help each other out. I also really like to keep my warlord as central as I can. I really like to mount my warlords. Of course, coming from mainly a Norman player, but where I think he has to be mounted. But depending on your faction, he may or may not have to be on a horse. But if given the option, I do like to do that because having that extra M of movement really allows me to be anywhere that I need to be for that we obey. That is ever so critical at times when you just need that one more activation, and the warlord being able to get to where he needs to get to is I find very handy.
In my case, it seems more because I rolled all commons or all uncommons on the one turn where I need or just one, and I need two to pull off the move. So I got that warlord over there to make it happen. So it gives you a little redundancy. And look at that warlord moving, and sounds good to me, man.
Yep. And then I would say a last tip of mine is that when say you're playing I think a pretty standard scenario where you have three objectives kind of along the central line of the board that are L apart from each other. I tend to want to deploy where I'm fighting for, say, 2 out of 3 of those, because I find that if I try and fight for all 3, I'm spreading myself out a little too thinly.
Sure,
and that,
good.
The opponent can, especially if they are going, usually it's your first player deploys half, second player deploys all, and then the back half then goes to the first player. And so I feel that, say, if I'm going second and I'm deploying everything at the same time, then I want to not spread myself so thin, because then the counter deployment can come in and I can find myself completely outmatched on at least one objective. And then my opponent can just swat away the one unit of warriors I put over there, and then I don't have anything else to respond in that kind of sector of the board. And so I find that just with how the unit numbers work out, a lot of times I really only have enough units to go after kind of 2 out of 3 of those objectives. And then if you can hold on to those 2 and control them and get those bonus points for them, you're just going to outscore your opponent as the game goes on. Just talking bonus points in general, and sometimes that can be the deciding factor in a close game, is how many of those objective bonus points you've been able to grab. So I would say that just kind of food for thought. Kind of pick which objectives you want to fight for, and then just kind of leave one, because if you can control, say, the left objective, but your opponent controls the other side on your right side, and then you're just fighting for the middle and hopefully winning that fight, then you're going to come out on top.
Yeah, good point there. If you're kind of thinking about terrain and stuff like that, specifically, you can try, you're going to fight for these 2, you can kind of set it up so the third one, that's where the blocking terrain goes in. So it makes it so they got to put in a little effort to go after it. They can't just maneuver all the way across. They'll have to spend Saga dice to walk through and at least claim that objective. And then depending, set up in the pieces and the type of scenario, sometimes I do like the one now where you can kind of claim the objective and then move off. So you could set it up. You're still going to go for 2, but you're going to put a kind of blocking terrain in between the third and the second objective. So after they grab it, they still have to put in some work to kind of bring around the unit or units that they use to take that and kind of bring them back into the battle. So you kind of sequester one of those objectives. And depending how everything goes too, that could be the sequestered one, either leave to your opponent, or that's the one you grab and they just don't even bother because it would be too much work for them to trundle through that big uneven field that you set up or got going on there. So yeah, definitely some interesting thoughts there as far as objectives terrain goes. So all right, man. Well, yeah, it's been good having you on discussing terrain here. This was
been a blast.
Your idea, and I think it was a good topic to revisit. Monty and I, discuss terrain at various points and various aspects, but it's definitely been a while, and really specifically addressed it from this angle, the deployment angle. But yeah, definitely good food for thought. And before we say goodbye, I do want to give a thank you to Sean, Patrick, Britt, DJ, Kitsune, Cruz, Damien, Robin, Mitch, and the rest of the Saga Thursday patrons. Thank you, folks, making a video about Saga every week in 2025 possible. And definitely comment below. So this topic is quite huge. So many aspects. Does your army like terrain? Want to avoid terrain?
Definitely.
Some can kind of overcome it with their fatigue abilities, either removing it or like the Goths don't care about it as much. So I'd be curious to hear kind of tips from the players, kind of relating specifically to their warband. You kind of talked a little bit about the Normans and what you like to do. For me, I'm always jumping around between warbands for casual games and stuff like that, just kind of mixing up all the time. So I don't have like a kind of an anchor point for a specific warband in my mind on how I would set up the terrain specifically to it. But I'd be curious, you play Anglo-Danes. What do you like to do for your Anglo-Danes? Do you have a levy bow unit or not? How do you like to set up the terrain? The Huns, are you going completely terrainless? As you put down the hill,
terrain at all, please.
What's the strategy there? But they can take some foot levy. So maybe they do like it in some aspects. So I'd just be curious what warband you play. If you take shooters or not, what kind of terrain setup do you try to make happen? And so I think, even if the terrain, the warbands can take it or leave it, that's like most of them, but just kind of having it in a familiar position, I think. There's comfort to that. We've been here before. We got the woods covering our flank like we usually do, so we can usually do the thing. A muscle memory type thing, I think, is interesting aspect to it. So let us know whatever, just kind of how you like to set up the terrain. If you get a perfect setup every time, what would it look like? But right. Well, thanks again, Brendan. Hopefully we
All
haven't
right.
seen the last of you. I think you've kind of
Yeah, I hope not.
loosely committed to ongoing returns here, so we haven't seen the last
Yeah.
of you.
Of
Right.
course, it'll be great to come back and talk Saga with you, Raj. So thanks so
All
much for
right.
having me, and it's been a great time.
We'll check you later, folks. Have a good one. Bye-bye.
Saga!
If you'd like to see more Saga content, consider joining the Heathen Army over on Patreon or popping on down to the Saga Thursday Discord server. Links below. Thanks, guys.